Good morning, everyone. Today we are looking at Isaiah chapter 44, and we are going to be looking at some lessons from this particular chapter. One of the things that's kind of difficult about chapter 44 from the standpoint of pulling the lessons out is there are so many that we could do. We could actually easily pull out 8 or 9 lessons from this chapter and it not be trying to stretch things at all as far as what we discuss, but we just simply don't have the time to go through and cover everything in the amount of detail that we would want to do that. And so this morning I've pulled 3 lessons out of chapter 44 that I think are very valuable to us in our understanding of the chapter, but also in our application of it. The first one is found in verses 6 through 8, where there God speaks to Israel and he says, "Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, I am the first and I am the last. Besides me there is no God. Who can proclaim as I do? Then let him declare it and set it in order for me, since I appointed the ancient people. And the things that are coming and shall come, let them show these to them. Do not fear nor be afraid. Have I not told you from that time and declared it? You are my witnesses. Is there a God besides me? Indeed, there is no other rock. I know not one." Here God makes the proclamation, not just that I think there is no other God besides me, but that there is none other. He says you can ask around, you can look around. If there's another God, let him present himself. Let him declare it. But he calls himself here in these 3 verses the King of Israel, the Redeemer, the first and the last, the one who has made all things. I appointed the ancient people. And so here you have a definitive declaration by God of who he is, and that there is none other like him, and that they are his witnesses for who he is. And if they won't stand up for him, who will? There is no other rock like him. And so there's a very interesting declaration here in verses 6 through 8, and it leads into the second section of chapter 44, because here he's going to talk about idolatry beginning in verse number 9 and how ridiculous the nature of the idols that men make are. And in the context of all of that, I want us to point out in our second lesson, verse number 15, because in verses 15 through 17, he says, "Then it shall be for a man to burn, and he will take some of it and warm himself. Yes, he kindles it and bakes bread. Indeed, he makes a god and worships it. He makes a carved image and falls down to it. He burns half of it in the fire, and with this half he eats meat. He roasts a roast and is satisfied. And he even warms himself and says, 'Ah, I am warm, I have seen the fire.' And the rest of it he makes into a god, his carved image. He falls down before it and worships it, prays to it, and says, 'Deliver me, for you are my God.'" In the midst of talking about how ridiculous this is, he's going to talk about a man who goes out and he fells a tree. And he prepares that tree, he cuts up that tree. And in verses 15 through 17, he talks about how that he's going to take some of that tree and he's going to burn it. And he's going to use the burning of that tree in order to keep himself warm, in order to cook his food, in order to do all of these various mundane tasks. And then he is going to see himself warm and satisfied, and he's going to take the other half of the tree. And then he's going to make a god as though that tree somehow has any kind of power whatsoever that he just took and burned to be able to cook his dinner. And then he tells him that this is his god so that this tree can now deliver him. When you go back and you think about the gods of the various nations around Israel, and you look at the things that were proclaimed about them and the ways that they were portrayed, it was very much this same style and this type. Not that these were gods that had interacted with them or that had in any way spoken to them or worked through them or anything of this nature in the way that God has with the children of Israel, but rather they were gods of convenience. They were gods of ease, and they were gods that helped soothe the mind as far as that goes. And so they would take things that they had just used, things from very mundane areas, and then they would create a god out of them, or things from very wealthy areas, and create a god out of it, and this would be their god. They do not know, he says, verse 18, nor understand. They do not know who he is, and they do not understand what it means to have a God that is truly real and alive. Then in the third lesson, I want us to come down to the very last verse of chapter 44. In chapter 44, verse 28, you have a prophetic statement that is very interesting and important in the overall scheme of things. He's talking about who he is, and he's talking about what he has said when he goes through and he talks about Jerusalem will be restored in verse 26 and 27, or backing up to verse 25 even. And he talks about all of these different things that he's going to do. But then you come to verse 28, and the statement is, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple your foundation shall be laid. Here, Isaiah speaks of Cyrus. Now, Cyrus is going to be the king of Persia. And he is going to be the one who is going to first allow the children of Israel to return from Babylonian captivity. We call it the Babylonian captivity. At that point, they're living under the Medo-Persian Empire. But he will allow them to return from captivity and to begin rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, to begin rebuilding the temple, the foundations of the temple. And those things are going to take place in the days of Cyrus. We read about them in the book of Ezra. And yet, one of the things that we need to understand is that this particular statement by Isaiah is made almost 200 years before Cyrus is going to make this proclamation. It's going to be made over 150 years before Cyrus is even born. And yet God here has said who it is that is going to do it, calls him by name, and says exactly what it is he is going to do. Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28 is an important aspect of God showing his power to the people of Israel, because not only is he going to tell them that they're going to return, he's going to tell them exactly who the king is that is going to allow them to return. And on top of that, it is in the midst of a discussion of who is the true and the living God. Some very interesting things to bring out of chapter 44. I hope that there are things that you have found of value from this chapter. And Lord willing, tomorrow we will come back and we will examine Isaiah chapter 45. Until then, I hope you have a great day.